So that's the fresh flowers done, and now moving on to the dried things. A couple of hours ago I took these into the garden and sprayed them with either silver or gold, and it's really important to do that outside because it's quite fumy, the spray. And you can just leave them like that, or if you want to get them sort of looking slightly more 3D, you can actually add glitter as well, and for that you want to have a spray adhesive like this, and then just spray a little bit of that and then scatter over a little bit, I think, of the same colour glitter, and that will then stay on, and so it just gives you that extra bit of glint and glitter, and as I say, just makes it a little bit more 3D.
Well, nearly finished the Christmas tree and it's starting to look really good. But not everybody has a real tree at Christmas, and artificial trees have become increasingly popular, especially over recent years. But when did the first artificial tree come about? Artificial trees also originated in Germany. In the 1880s, goose feather trees were invented in an attempt to combat the damage being done to native fir trees in the name of Christmas. These trees were known as Nuremberg Christmas trees, and their feathers were dyed green to make them look realistic. By the 1930s, artificial trees were being seen in homes across the UK. They were either made from goose feathers like this, and they tended to be quite small, the same design as was seen decades earlier in Germany, or from natural bristle like this tiny one here. During World War II, the felling of timber became severely restricted, and so suddenly a real need for artificial trees was created.
One of the most novel of this season's novelties is the spiral Christmas tree. You know, the sort of tree that goes around and comes out queer. But even a tin hat can't stop a smiling face in full smile, and the bells of peace ring out in spite of everything.
After the war, people wanted the security of Christmas as one of the symbols to set them back on their feet. After years of rationing, Christmas was back in fashion in a big way. The 50s and 60s saw more changes. A brave new world was on the horizon and modernist ideas were everywhere. By the 1960s, silver, aluminium, futuristic Christmas trees were being imported from America, and they were the height of fashion with trendy urbanites.
Good girl, Santa baby, and hurry down the chimney tonight.
Real trees were still popular in the 60s, but when it came to decorating them, the spanglier and sparklier the better. You just couldn't have enough tinsel. Oh, and don't forget the fairy on the top either. But in the 70s, many desperate housewives preferred the convenience and cleanliness of artificial trees, which by now were being manufactured on a huge scale. By the 80s, the range of artificial trees had ballooned. All sorts of plastic trees had been developed, and the choice of coloured trees was enormous. The artificial tree had finally conquered Christmas. Now, if you don't want a traditional Christmas tree and you don't want to go down the artificial route, there are some fabulous alternatives. There's some great trees and shrubs that at this time of year have wonderful barks and stems and also fruit in the form of berries. We take this silver birch, for example. This is a multi-stemmed Jack Montii, and it's perfect. It really does shine out at this time of year. So I'm going to pot it up into a container. And then this can go into the house for a few days over the Christmas period, but also look great in the container in the garden, or even be planted out into the ground. I'll tease out the roots a little bit. And it looks dramatic with this black ceramic pot too. And then rather than just leaving bare soil around the base, I'm going to add another dimension using these white heathers. And I'm packing them in there pretty much as tightly as possible. Now, you might think I've finally lost the plot, but if you get a nail brush, dip it in water, and actually scrub up the trunk of the birch, it really will sing out And it's worth that little bit of extra effort. It really is. Clean it all up. I'm not going to do this to the whole garden, just the silver birch. If the trees are too big for you, or say the silver birch is too subtle, then go for something with high impact. Something like dogwoods are fantastic because their stems really sing out. And there's a huge range, you know, from the corals through the oranges, the yellows. I've planted Cornus alba sibirica because I really love the deep red stems. They're perfect for this time of year and for the festive look. And I've underplanted it with a red cyclamen and this lovely variegated ivy to really set it off. But you've got to get impact through these stems. Don't just plant a plant with 2 or 3 stems. It's not going to do the job. Well, I've put 5 plants here. If you can get them bare-rooted, do, because it'll really keep the cost down. They're so much cheaper. But if you want to go for a purple theme this Christmas, then what about a Calicarpa Christmas tree? They're fabulous plants. They come with their ready-made baubles on them. They really are wonderful. But don't just plant one at a time. If you want berries next year, then you have to buy 2 or ideally 3, and they will cross-pollinate, so you don't lose your baubles. So I'm just backfilling here, and then I'm going to underplant it with the perfect colour combination. I mean, look at this. This ornamental purple cabbage just fits so beautifully with it, and I'm going to put 5 of those around the base. I would say this is quite a tasteful container. If purple's your colour this Christmas, these are your plants. And when night falls, these trees and shrubs take on the magic of the season, with the addition of a few simple lights and contemporary decorations.
Extraordinary view. Richard, although it's a magnificent view, it's a fairly bleak one at this time of year, isn't it?
Yeah, what does draw your eye, of course, you know, beyond the rather vague, fuzzy browns and greys, are those blocked out bits of dark green, the evergreens. They are really the focal points of the landscape in winter. And you can imagine that at a time people were beginning to understand the seasonal cycles of plants, what they must have made of these trees and other plants that broke the rules, that didn't shed their leaves in autumn, that stayed mysteriously and therefore probably magically green throughout the winter.
Now, what's the significance of bringing ivy into the house? Have people always been happy with bringing this potentially sort of malignant, insinuating, dark plant into the house as part of celebrations? Does it change its character as it crosses the threshold?
I think it does. I think that one of the points about winter greenery was bringing the vitality of the wild world, the evergreenness, literally, into the house. And by doing that, in some way, you partook of its continuing vitality in the winter. So I think, yes, all sins are forgiven in the house.
The flowers are a source of winter nectar, aren't they?
They are, yes. I mean, the flowers are virtually the last bit of nectar for late bees. The berries themselves are terrific food for birds, missel thrushes, pigeons, whatever. So, I mean, it's not just a question of ivy not being a villain, but it is actually a great boon in the winter.
Now, you'd be pushed to see more mistletoe than that on one tree, wouldn't you?
Imagine what this plant must have seemed like to people when they were beginning to become aware of how plants worked. Yeah. An extraordinary thing, growing in the air without roots, green through the winter. I mean, it isn't really any wonder that it was one of the most magically endowed plants in Europe. In the west of England, mistletoe was very much an orchard plant. It was almost a secondary crop. It has these white berries, the colour of milk, but held between kind of splayed limbs. I mean, you couldn't ask for a plant. If you designed one to be a fertility symbol, it would be mistletoe.
It's interesting that you've got along this hedgerow, which you so often see, it's been cut and cut regularly, but the holly's left.
In some parts of the country, you find that is the only bit of the hedge that remains.
So what is it, do you think, that people feel about holly that stops them cutting it down?
There's superstition about things that can befall you if you cut down a holly tree, I mean, is huge and ancient. My own theory is that holly is seen as a kind of protective tree, that as well as having that vitality that we've seen in all the evergreen winter plants, the prickliness of it, I think, suggests a kind of protectiveness. And if we look after it, it will look after us.
So all that comes into the house at Christmas time, when you bring it in, that benevolence and that protection, yes, as well as a vitality.
I think so.
But of course, it's only female hollies that bear berries, isn't it?
It's a dioecious tree, so there are both male and female trees, and the red fruits are exclusively on the maiden hollies.
Most of us use red to decorate our homes during this festive season. And how about this for the simplest of wreaths? Go out and splash out on some lovely red apples, or use windfalls if you're lucky enough to have them in the garden, and just thread through a piece of strong wire and hang them up on the door. But I want to make a few for our feathered friends. We've got these crab apples from our cottage garden, and this is one called Harry Baker, and they're absolutely perfect for doing this. I've just got a piece of stub wire, ordinary florist's wire, and I'm just going to thread them round. Terribly tempted to just use them for earrings, I think but no, the birds come first. So I'm going to finish threading that up and just twist the wire together at the end and go and hang it out on branches all around the garden. I think we should have them everywhere. We've got plenty of apples and they'll last for so much longer hanging in the trees and out of harm's way too. The birds can really enjoy those. Glorious. And one of the best ways to decorate the house at Christmas, especially if you're a gardener, is to use pot plants. Just look at this cymbidium. It reminds me of boxes of chocolates and mulled wine, and look at this rich velvety inside petals here. Now, although it looks so exotic and sumptuous, this is a really easy plant to look after. You don't have to belt up the central heating and give it lots of care and attention. It'll just respond to an occasional watering and to being kept in a reasonably sort of warm room, out of hot sun. During the summer, you can actually stand it outside and just leave it in quite a shady place, water it occasionally, feed it during the autumn and bring it back in, and you should get repeat flowering year after year. And you don't even have to concentrate on flowers. You can go for foliage plants. Just look at this lovely sort of crinkly-edged Begonia rex. This is one called Red Robin, and there's one here called Merry Christmas, so very, very apt. And I can just imagine putting several of these together just so you can enjoy these different patterns and leaf shapes and the different shades of red within their leaves. I suppose the red flower bulb that most of us associate with Christmas, though, is the hippeastrum, the amaryllis. And lots of you will have received big, fat bulbs like this at Christmas time. And it really is child's play to pot them up. Just get yourself a nice deep pot, some good, sandy, well-drained compost. And make sure that when you plonk it in, these roots are not curled around at all, because that will stop it from growing, really slow it down. So just let them go right down to the bottom of the pot. And when you've finished potting it up, the shoulders of the bulb should actually sit on the surface of the compost. So I'm just going to fill this in round here and make it nice and comfortable. It really is wonderful, isn't it, during the Christmas holidays, to get your hands into some soil, because you start getting withdrawal symptoms if you don't. So potting up a few amaryllis is just the thing, really, for a Christmas activity.
From red amaryllis bulbs to red amaryllis flowers. This is one of my absolute favourite varieties, which is called Red Velvet. It's beautiful, dark, dark crimson, and they're becoming increasingly popular throughout Europe to give as a cut flower or as a growing bulb. And we've been to Holland to investigate a €25 million industry.